Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of our ProRevenge, where you come for your daily dose of satisfaction by listening to stories about others getting their just desserts. In this episode, we have 7 stories. You'll hear how an employer lands himself in jail, a messy story about a married couple, an amazing school revenge, and we'll finish with what happens when you propose at your friend's wedding without permission. Yikes! I hope you stay for the stories today and subscribe for future videos. This first story is titled, Maya and I Get Her Boss Sent to Prison. Maya is a good friend of mine, a sweet and caring mother of 2 young children. She's also a widow and was an undocumented immigrant. She came to this country in early 2008 with her husband and 1-year-old daughter, pregnant with her second child. Her husband worked long hours as a field worker, often 60 to 70 hours a week. They'd been in the country for maybe 6 months when disaster struck. Her husband was killed in a car crash on the way to work one morning. Maya did what she had to do. She got a job at a local donut shop and cafe. At first, she was happy because everyone except the owner was an immigrant, and she had much in common with her CO workers. The boss told her she could work as many hours as she needed, which she desperately needed. However, it quickly became apparent there was a dark underside to the shop. The owner only hired undocumented workers with no documentation. He told them that if they worked hard, he'd take care of them, but if they didn't, he'd call immigration officers and they'd be deported. He scheduled them for 48 hours a week, 6 days a week, with no sick days, no vacation days, and no overtime pay. Maya came to me and asked what to do. I informed her that what the boss was doing was illegal. He was violating Department of Labor regulations and counting on her fear to keep her quiet. Taking my advice, she did one of the bravest things I've ever seen. She called the Department of Labor, knowing she could get fired and that she and her children could be deported. The Department of Labor investigated and found that the boss owed his employees over $27,000 for the period in question. He reached an agreement to pay all employees the wages they were owed by an agreed-upon date. Here's the part that sent him to federal prison. He called each employee into his office one at a time and handed them a check for the overtime they were owed. Over $3,300 per employee. He told them to endorse the check because he needed a photocopy for the Department of Labor. They complied, he copied it, and then he leaned over and ran it through the shredder. He told them that if anyone complained to the feds, they'd all be deported and to get back to work. Maya came to me crying, saying she needed that money and asking what she could do. Well, folks, this guy was going down. I dropped the dime on this terrible boss. The local paper had covered the story when he agreed to the restitution, so it only took a few clicks to find the information I needed. I called the Department of Labor's office in our state capital and was transferred to the original investigators. I explained what Maya had told me and her fears about complaining. They were incredulous at his audacity and vowed to look into it. Usually the federal machine grinds slowly, if at all, but this was too much for the Department of Labor. In just 2 months, a federal grand jury handed down a 10-count indictment for concealment by trick, making false statements to the U.S. Department of Labor, and willful failure to pay overtime. The conviction for concealment by trick and making false statements carries a maximum penalty of 5 years imprisonment and a $250,000 fine, or both. The conviction for willful failure to pay overtime carries a maximum penalty of 6 months imprisonment and a $10,000 fine, or both. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison. I don't know if he served the full sentence, but I bet he never pulls that stunt again. Postscript to this story, my boss went to jail at the end of 2011. Maya and her co-workers stayed at the donut cafe, which was run by the boss's wife. No one was deported. I don't know about the others, but Maya became a U.S. citizen in the fall of 2016. She has since remarried, and her kids are doing well in school. She now works as a secretary at a local company, making far more than she did slinging donuts. I'm very proud of her. There are far too many stories about employers preying on undocumented immigrants, and it took real courage for Maya to report her boss. As for your question about how Maya became a citizen despite the investigation into the shop's hiring practices, I don't have specific details on immigration processes, as it's outside my knowledge. It's possible she pursued legal pathways, like a visa or naturalization, that weren't affected by the investigation, especially since the focus was on the employer's violations, not the employees. This next story is titled, How I Made $2,000 Off a Meth Dealer. A few years ago, I was married to someone who became a heavy drug user. She wasn't always like that, but addiction changes people. I kept interfering with her lifestyle, trying to get her treatment, and she rewarded my efforts with a restraining order. Who would have thought? I got kicked out of my place and ended up in a studio apartment with nothing but my toothbrush and the clothes I was wearing. One of her grand plans was to get a front for a large amount of drugs, using everything of value we owned as collateral. Long story short, the drug dealer took everything we owned and put it in storage somewhere in town. She planned to sell the drugs by the end of the weekend and become a millionaire, classic flawed logic. She messed up the plan and ended up using all the drugs herself. Now, all our valuable stuff was gone. I tried to work something out with the dealer, but he demanded an absurd amount of money, and I made some threatening comments he didn't appreciate, so negotiations stalled. Eventually, I heard he got locked up, and some of his friends put his property in a storage unit for safekeeping until he got out. I hit every storage place in town with my story and a picture, hoping for a break. Finally, I found the place. The owner told me the unit was going up for auction the next weekend for non-payment. He said if I paid the 3 months back rent, he'd write it up as if I won the auction and I could have the unit. $320 hit the counter, we drilled the lock, and all my stuff was there. What's more, I now owned all of his stuff, free and clear. Being a decent person, I dug out all the personal, irreplaceable items, like old photos and important documents, boxed them up, and gave them to his mom, whom I found on Facebook. I made quite a bit of money selling his stuff on Craigslist, about $2,000. I'm divorced now, have all my stuff back, and I'm happy. That was a stand-up move, returning the personal items. A lot of people would have just tossed everything. This next story is titled, Girls Shouldn't Win Math Competitions, So My Son Should Win. I'm a high school student, and this happened in the 9th grade. My teacher decided I should compete in a math competition because she saw potential in me. I agreed because she was my favorite teacher, though I didn't care much since I was kind of lazy at the time. On the day of the competition, I saw a kid boasting about how he didn't sleep because he reviewed everything. I was annoyed but didn't think much of it. The results came and he won, but I got second place. I was shocked and happy, and so was my teacher. Everything was great until I heard a lady say, "Good thing that girl didn't win. This is a math competition. My boy should win. He studied really hard, and a girl shouldn't beat him." I was livid. My teacher patted me on the back and told me not to listen to her. When they announced I got second place, the entitled mom started booing. I couldn't take it, so I devised a plan. The competition happened every year, according to my teacher, and in 10th grade, there was a regional competition. I swore I had to win the next year. I spent the entire year teaching myself various math equations, and my friends helped with everything. I reviewed for a whole year just to prove this entitled mother wrong. The next year, I entered the competition more ready than ever. I saw the boy again, and his mother was boasting about how he didn't sleep, knowing he'd win again, and was excited for regionals. Everything she said motivated me to do better. The exam was tough, but I managed to answer most of the questions. The announcements came, and they said only one person in each grade level scored 40 or above. The entitled kid was smirking, thinking it was him, telling his mom, "Regionals, here we go." To his surprise, I won. The look of shock on the entitled mom and kid's faces was worth it. They didn't say a word. His teacher stood there, stunned. I gave them a huge smirk, went up on stage and accepted the prize. As I came down, I heard the entitled mother crying, saying, "My boy was supposed to win. He was supposed to go to regionals." Her cries of agony made the whole year of reviewing worth it. I got second place in the regional competition and became friends with the guy who took first. It was a great experience, and I'm glad I don't have to see that entitled mom and kid again since there's no math competition in 11th grade. This is great ProRevenge. No harm, no foul, and the dedication was impressive. Before I begin the last story, a subscriber linked me this ProRevenge after my Entitled People episode, where an entitled girl was upset that nobody paid attention to her after proposing at her friend's wedding. This next story is titled, Don't Announce Your Engagement at Someone Else's Wedding, or This Might Happen to You. Last summer, I was at my cousin's wedding. His bride and her family had been close with ours since before I was born, and the couple had known each other since they were toddlers, so it was a particularly exciting event for both families. After the ceremony, when the party had just started, one of the bridesmaids, whom I'll call Sarah, announced her own engagement. The attention immediately shifted from the newlyweds to Sarah and her equally smug fiancé. My cousin's wife, whom I'll call Emma, didn't make a scene or say a single negative word about Sarah. She looked like she was on the verge of tears but kept grinning and acted happy for the couple. This was unusual, as Emma is typically quite confrontational and speaks her mind no matter the consequences. Sarah later picked Emma to be the maid of honor at her own wedding, which took place last weekend. I wasn't there, but my cousin sent me the best bits on Snapchat and explained the situation. Here's where the fun begins. Emma's two much younger sisters were the flower girls at Sarah's wedding. At the last moment, Emma switched the white petals in their baskets for blue ones she secretly brought. She told the sisters not to say anything or let the bride see until it was time to scatter them down the aisle. Sarah looked confused upon seeing the blue petals, which didn't match her theme, but she didn't say anything in the moment. Most of Sarah's other bridesmaids were Emma's friends, had attended Emma's wedding, and were in on the scheme. At the reception, Emma's sisters and the other bridesmaids stayed tight-lipped when Sarah demanded to know why there were blue petals. The wedding planner took a lot of heat for not checking the flower girls' baskets before they walked down the aisle. Finally, it was time for the speeches. The speeches took place in front of a massive screen displaying a loop of photos of Sarah and her husband, compiled by Emma. Emma took the remote that controlled the presentation screen and started with some approved humorous photos of Sarah with Emma and their friends to facilitate light-hearted jokes. At the end, Emma said to Sarah, "You must be wondering why there were blue petals instead of the white ones planned." Then she displayed the last slide. Emma announced in front of everyone that she was 5 months pregnant, that she'd just discovered the baby was a boy, hence the blue petals, and the last slide was her ultrasound picture. There were shocked yells and gasps. Sarah had a fit, but those involved in the scheme cheered so loudly that I regret watching the Snapchat recording with headphones. Emma and my cousin were eventually thrown out of the party, but they were all smiles. Sarah's fuming mother confronted Emma outside, and Emma retorted, gentle, "I'm pregnant." I reckon Sarah doesn't speak to most of those bridesmaids anymore. The only way to top an engagement at a wedding is to announce a pregnancy. That's going to be remembered and talked about for a long time. This next story is titled, Revenge on Irresponsible Neighbors. Years ago, I worked with a receptionist at a vet clinic named Margot. Margot was and still is a very sweet 65-year-old woman who had been at the practice since it opened 40 years ago. She always had a smile, a joke, compliments, and baked goods for your birthday. She never had an unkind word to say about anyone. She was seriously one of the coolest people I've ever worked with, and she knew everyone, from our regular clients to our mailman's granddaughter. The only bad thing about Margot, and this was not her fault, was that she and her family lived next to one of the most irresponsible, unpleasant families I've ever met, who owned 2 even more troublesome pit bulls. I'm talking about dogs that were never trained, neglected by their owners, and left to run wild. These dogs were constantly escaping and terrorizing the neighborhood, even trying to get into Margot's house. Margot had asked the neighbors more than once to keep the dogs contained in their yard and to ensure they didn't escape. Margot had an elderly, overweight cat named Smokestack, and these pit bulls were known to attack smaller animals. Smokestack was a kind, passive cat who loved anyone who gave him attention. The family basically told her to get lost when she requested they better train their dogs. They claimed they knew what they were doing, that their dogs would never harm other creatures, and how dare she accuse the breed, yada yada yada, essentially brushing her off. Margot knew there had been reports filed against her neighbors, but nothing had ever been done about it. So, she kept Smokestack in the house most of the time to keep him safe and was very careful not to let him out. If you've been paying attention, you'll notice I'm using was and had regarding Smokestack. The cat is no longer alive, and it was as awful as you might think, exactly what Margot had feared would happen. 3 weeks before Christmas, Margot had the day off and was in the garage with Smokestack, fiddling with some Christmas decorations. Unbeknownst to her, the pit bulls next door got out and ran into the garage. They went straight for Smokestack. I'll spare the gruesome details, but Margot screamed for help. It was only when her son and husband came out with a baseball bat that they were able to free Smokestack from the dog's jaws. I was working that day, and I'll never forget when she came in, crying harder than I've ever seen anyone cry, clutching poor, dying Smokestack in her arms. Her husband had to hold her while we tried to save Smokestack, but we couldn't. It would have taken a miracle and then some to bring the mangled cat back. He passed away, an awful way to go in what should have been the golden years of his life. Margot sat there for a while with his mangled body, quietly crying before she finally kissed whatever part of him was still intact and stood up. She said, "I've got a job to do. Take care of him, girls," and then she left. We figured Margot would take a few days off to be with her family and then continue life as normal. We figured wrong. When I say Margot knew everyone, I mean everyone. Right after leaving the clinic, Margot went to the police with pictures of poor Smokestack and told her story. These were the same police officers she'd known for over 20 years. She used to babysit them when they were rowdy middle schoolers. They were shocked to hear what happened to their surrogate grandmother and pushed her case to the front of the line. The case found itself before a judge whose daughter had gone to school with Margot's daughter. The judge granted an emergency dangerous animal extraction warrant for her neighbor's dogs. There was a hearing within 2 weeks, which was ridiculously fast. The neighbors tried to argue that their dogs weren't aggressive. They even accused Margot of having it out for their family and making the whole story up. But their argument fell apart when dozens of dangerous animal reports were presented and completely crumbled when Margot showed surveillance video of her property, clearly depicting the dogs coming onto her land and attacking Smokestack. The emergency extraction and humane destruction of the neighbor's dogs were granted. It was Christmas Eve when Margot heard a knock on her door. She opened it to see the neighbors standing there, sobbing uncontrollably, begging her to stop animal control. They cried, saying they'd had these dogs since they were puppies, how the kids would be devastated, and how it would ruin everyone's Christmas. They asked if she could find it in her heart to forgive the dogs and give them another chance. Up until this moment, the neighbors had behaved terribly. They never apologized for their dogs attacking Smokestack, never offered condolences, never apologized for trying to slander her name in court, and didn't even pay for Smokestack's cremation. They showed no remorse for the damage their dogs had caused. As the neighbors stood there blubbering about how this would ruin their Christmas, Margot looked them straight in the eye and, in her calmest voice, said, "You took away my family, so now I'm taking yours." She shut the door in their faces just as animal control pulled into the driveway. Margot wasn't surprised as she watched the dogs get hauled into a truck and taken away. After all, it was her idea for animal control to take the dogs on Christmas Eve, a perk of knowing the animal control supervisor for years. Margot even ensured the dogs were euthanized before the outside Christmas lights were turned on that night. The family never received the remains, nor did they get a chance to bring another animal into their home. The father proceeded to drive drunk into a telephone pole that same night, dying instantly. The mother went off the deep end, so Child Protective Services picked up the kids by February, and the house foreclosed in September. Despite how traumatic Smokestack's death was, I'd like to think that if the neighbors had shown even a shred of regret, Margot wouldn't have gone as far as she did. She was, and still is, a person who forgives and forgets. Or maybe she knew what had to be done to push things to the point of no return before another family lost a member to these irresponsible neighbors. Either way, thank you, Margot, for making the world a little safer for pets. Rest in peace, Smokestack. Hopefully, I'll see you on the other side with your favorite orange sock and a can of tuna. Guys, I know this story will spark many opinions, so I'm leaving it to you, the listeners. Do you think what Margot did was over the line? Or was she in the right when it comes to a family member for a family member? Leave your comments below and make sure to vote in the poll right here. This next story is titled, "Slumlord Lost His Business Over a $300 Security Deposit." I rented a house from a man who owned a painting business. The power was off when we came to see the property, but he assured us everything worked and even put it in the contract. The place was dirty and poorly maintained, so we negotiated the security deposit down to $300. It turned out the heat, air conditioning, refrigerator, and dishwasher didn't work. I asked him to have someone look at them, and he yelled at me, leaving threatening voicemails. On top of that, he would show up unannounced and let himself in. During one of his visits, I showed him that the crawl space was flooded, creating a breeding ground for thousands, if not millions, of cockroaches and mosquitoes coming up through the floor vents. There was no duct work, even though he claimed the heat and air conditioning worked fine. He accused me of causing the flood myself, despite me showing him the source was a rusted-through pipe. He refused to address any problems, saying, "If you don't like it, you can move. You can't pay for a bargain and expect to live like you're at the Ritz." This man was terrible in general. For example, he once hired someone off Craigslist to cut down a tree in the rental property's yard. The man worked all day for an agreed-upon $150, cutting up and hauling off the tree. He came back that evening standing in the yard, and I asked if I could help him. He said he was waiting for the owner to meet him so he could get paid. The owner kept saying he was on the way but never showed up, and the guy never got paid. Another time, our neighbor told us the landlord had punched a previous renter in the face and refused to pay him for a day's work for his company. He also bragged about renting to undocumented immigrants, knowing they wouldn't sue. We had a newborn baby, so we called his bluff and found a new place to live. We left the home in much better shape than we found it, and he said he'd mail us the security deposit but never did. He dodged my calls until one day he called to say, "You aren't getting it back. You broke the contract when you left early, so go get lost." I was really upset because we were new parents with very little money. That $300 was a big deal to us, but a drop in the bucket for him. He owned an upscale painting business and had 15 rental properties. The next week I was online leaving negative reviews for his business when I noticed his website's domain had lapsed and was available for purchase. Here comes my revenge. I knew exactly what I had to do. I immediately bought it and created a homepage with contact info for his biggest competitor. He flipped out when he saw his competitor's info. I asked if he wanted to buy the website for $320, the cost of the security deposit plus the price I paid for the domain. He was irate, calling my work, threatening to sue my employer, and leaving threatening voicemails saying he was going to beat me up, that he knew where I lived, and that he had my social security number. I suggested he buy the website domain back to avoid missing out on jobs. He said he was taking me to court. I told him I had recorded his threatening calls and saved all his text messages and voicemails. He claimed he'd sue me for illegally recording him, and I replied, "I look forward to seeing you in court, where I'll counter-sue and press charges for harassing me." After a while he realized he wasn't getting anywhere and called, saying he hadn't gotten a job in months. I suggested he focus on creating a website to find business. He lost it and yelled at me again. 6 months passed, and he still hadn't bought the website from me. He called, begging me to do the right thing and give him the domain back. I told him the current price was $350. He said no. 6 months later he called again, and I told him the price was now $380. Eventually he texted me, saying, "I went out of business. I hope you're happy." He called me a terrible person and said, "Karma's a jerk." I responded, "Maybe if you stopped trying to rip people off, your karma wouldn't be so bad." That was the last time I heard from him. Major business listing sites confirmed his business had indeed closed. I renewed the domain for another 2 years just in case he was bluffing. A few months later I drove by his office to see if it was still there. It was empty, with a "for rent" sign posted. I never got that $300 back and spent money buying his domain, but it was totally worth it. Guys, I have a story. A few years back, I had an awful landlord. When we left, he wouldn't return our security deposit because he said there were scratches on the floor from a chair. When we argued the scratches were minimal, he came back with a quote saying it would cost $3,000 to repair the damages. He asked my roommates if we'd rather surrender the $1,500 deposit or pay an extra $1,500 to fix the floor. In hindsight, I'm pretty sure he scammed us because we were young, but he was threatening lawsuits and we didn't know better. We lost $1,500 to him. Yeah, some landlords are the worst. This last story is titled, "My Revenge Story Almost Killed a Man." About 3 years ago, I was working in a large factory that hired through 5 different temp services. The place was like a revolving door. People came and left without warning, and it was hard to find a familiar face. When someone started stealing my lunches, everyone became a suspect. After falling victim to the lunchbox bandit for a week straight, and I'm talking about 6 12-hour days with no lunch, the frustration sparked several evil plans. In the end, I decided Carolina Reaper peppers would give me the fastest and most effective results. I knew people would think twice before stealing lunches. I spent all night making the best steak fajitas for lunch the next day. I minced the Reaper peppers into a nice pico de gallo and topped my devil fajitas with it. I carefully placed them in a Tupperware bowl, garnished with cilantro and limes, and covered them with a clear lid to display their beauty. The next morning, about an hour after I placed them in the fridge, a woman started screaming for help. I ran to the lunchroom to find the lunchbox bandit lying on the floor, gasping for air. The Reaper peppers had triggered a severe asthma attack, and he had to be rushed to the hospital. He never said anything, and neither did I, until now. Reaper peppers are not to be messed with. I'd hate to have been the guy lying on the floor because I ate someone's food I shouldn't have been eating. But then again, I wouldn't eat other people's food because it's not mine. Below are my opinions on each of the stories. Story 1. Maya and I get her boss sent to prison. This story is absolutely inspiring. Maya's bravery as an undocumented widow, risking everything to report her exploitative boss, is nothing short of heroic. The audacity of that boss, shredding $3,300 checks for overtime and threatening deportation, makes my blood boil. Your quick action to escalate the issue to the Department of Labor was spot on, and seeing him slapped with a 5-year prison sentence for his crimes feels like justice served. The fact that Maya became a U.S. citizen, remarried, and now thrives as a secretary with her kids doing well in school is the perfect happy ending. Regarding your question about her citizenship, I'd guess she might have qualified for something like a U visa for victims of workplace abuse, but I'm no immigration expert. This story is a powerful reminder that standing up to predators can change lives for the better. Story 2. How I Made $2,000 Off a Meth Dealer. Wow, this one's a roller coaster. Your ex's addiction spiraling into a restraining order and losing all your possessions to a drug dealer is heartbreaking. But your hustle to track down that storage unit and snag it for $320? That's next-level resourcefulness. Making $2,000 off the dealer's stuff while still having the decency to return his personal items to his mom shows you've got a solid moral compass despite the chaos. It's satisfying to know you got your stuff back and moved on to a happier life. This story's a great mix of grit, luck, and petty revenge, proof that sometimes the universe gives you a chance to come out on top. Story 3. Girls shouldn't win math competitions, so my son should win. I'm so here for this story. That entitled mom booing you for getting second place in a math competition just because you're a girl is infuriating. Her girls shouldn't beat boys nonsense lit a fire under you, and your year-long grind to master math equations paid off spectacularly. Beating her son the next year and seeing their shocked, silent faces? Priceless. That smirk you flash while accepting the prize is iconic, and making it to regionals while befriending the first-place winner is the cherry on top. This story's a perfect example of channeling anger into hard work and proving haters wrong without sinking to their level. You're a total rock star. Story 4. Don't announce your engagement at someone else's wedding, or this might happen to you. This is petty revenge at its finest. Sarah stealing the spotlight at your cousin's wedding with her engagement announcement was so selfish, and Emma's restraint in the moment was pure class. But her comeback at Sarah's wedding? Absolute genius. Switching the flower girl's petals to blue and dropping the pregnancy bombshell with an ultrasound slide during her speech was a masterstroke. The chaos, Sarah's meltdown, the cheering bridesmaids, and Emma's gentle, I'm pregnant retort, had me laughing out loud. It's the perfect way to one-up a tacky move without ruining the day entirely. This story's a brilliant lesson in not stealing someone's thunder unless you're ready for a bigger storm. Story 5. Revenge on Irresponsible Neighbors. This story broke my heart and then left me in awe of Margot's resolve. Losing Smokestack to those untrained pit bulls is devastating. Margot's pain must have been unimaginable. Those neighbors' refusal to take responsibility or even apologize for their dog's deadly attack is infuriating. Margot leveraging her community connections to fast-track the case and get those dogs removed on Christmas Eve was cold, calculated, and completely justified. Her line, "You took away my family, so now I'm taking yours," is chilling and powerful. The neighbor's downfall, losing their kids, their home, and the father's tragic end feels like karma piling on. I don't think Margot went too far. She protected others from future harm. Rest in peace, Smokestack. This story's a tribute to fierce love for a pet. Story 6. Slumlord lost his business over a $300 security deposit. This one's so satisfying that landlord's negligence, ignoring black mold, broken appliances, and a cockroach infestation is disgusting, and his threats over a $300 deposit are just vile. Buying his lapsed website domain and redirecting it to his competitor was a stroke of evil genius. His desperate calls and threats only made it sweeter when his painting business tanked, holding firm and raising the price each time he begged for the domain. Ice cold and brilliant. Your story about losing a $1,500 deposit to a scummy landlord hits home. Mine tried something similar too. This story's a perfect reminder that even small injustices can spark epic revenge when you hit where it hurts. Story 7. My revenge story almost killed a man. Yikes, this one's intense. Losing your lunch for a week straight to a thief at a chaotic factory sounds maddening, and those Carolina Reaper fajitas were a fiery stroke of genius. I can picture the lunchbox bandit gasping on the floor after that asthma attack. Talk about instant karma. While it's wild that it nearly killed him, I can't blame you for wanting to teach a lesson after 6 days of hunger. The fact that neither of you ratted each other out adds a weird mutual respect to the chaos. This story's a spicy cautionary tale. Don't mess with someone's food, especially when they've got Reaper peppers in their arsenal. That wraps up another episode of our Pro-Revenge series. If you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button. The next 100 subscribers will get a baby duck sent to their house. I'm kidding! I'll see you in the next one.